I think it was about a decade ago, I read a story. It was a psychological study. It was a study that had been done in the United States around elections. And it showed that generally a majority of Americans would vote for a tall white man. And tallness had something to do with it, whiteness, obviously, maleness, obviously. And you're a very tall white man. And so I really wanted to get your perspective. How tall are you, Bob? You're real tall.
6'8". I'm 6'8".
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the study was talking about sort of this deep-seated, very deep psychological cultural thing in Americans about not only white male leadership, but height and stature, literally, as indicating a higher level of intelligence and a higher level of, leadership ability. Now, I think in 2020, a lot more people realize that's total BS. But I do have to wonder how much this still holds weight for a lot of people when they consider who they're voting for at the polls. And since you're a very tall white man, I wanted to, ask you, so what has that been like? What types of privileges have you seen in your life because of how you are physically presented and how you look? And have you had some realizations about that over the course of your life, and how have you handled it?
So yeah, that's a good question. And if you could get out the psychologist's couch, we could be here probably for a couple of weeks. But I'll try and keep it short on that. Yeah, I know I know of those kinds of studies. And I know, anecdotally history shows that also, although there are people who were not tall,
who might have been more violent.
Yeah, right. I was going to say like Napoleon and
right.
Hitler and people like that.
He had to massacre everybody.
Yeah, right. So I'm aware of those. And I would say that I lived with the expectation that because I was always tall. I was always the tallest one in my class, or almost the tallest one in my class, since I was a little kid. And so I lived with the expectation that I was going to succeed. That was just part and parcel of what I believed about, or was made to believe about myself. And so at one point when I was at Intersections, and we were doing an event on white privilege, and people would kind of discount my thoughts on that because, what do you know? They would be quick to say. As a tall, straight, and then you could add that too, tall, straight white man. And who grew up in a, basically upper middle class existence. I mean, it was all over. I had all the benefits,
You're the perfect, honest white person.
I am. I don't know if I'm a perfect, honest white person, but I'm a perfect.
Be honest about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I had so what I used to try and figure out with myself, because much of my life has been devoted to, and some of this, has been devoted to seeking equality and giving voice to the voiceless. And that's been part and parcel of what I've done vocationally and personally, I like to think. So where'd that come from? Why did I feel that way, given all these privileged elements of my own life? And I've asked myself that, and I think I kind of have an answer, not so much for why is that beneficial to me, but how can I then talk as we're doing here in this conversation? How can I help others who are white people of privilege, tall or otherwise? How can I help them kind of find their place in this conversation? And so where do I empathize or identify with people who are not in those that privileged position as I am? And I go back to a very specific time in my life. I was about 12 years old. And my parents I lived in Levittown, I remember. And my parents had gotten me a guitar, thinking that I could learn how to play the guitar and that would be fulfilling for me somehow. You know, I'm like tone deaf and it was a real struggle, but be that as it may. And I used to have to walk to my guitar lessons, right? And this was before guitars were cool. So I had an old fashioned guitar. I was 6'4". I weighed about 140 pounds. I had thick glasses, a bad case of acne, right? And I carried this big old, ancient guitar case. And I would walk down Jerusalem Avenue, this is true, Jerusalem Avenue and to my guitar lessons every week. And Tuesday afternoons. And I would dread it. And the reason I would dread it, and I remember it like it was yesterday to this day, was because cool kids would drive by in their cars, throw things, shout out all kinds of derogatory things about me, and remember, I'm like 12 years old or 13 years old or something like that. And when you're that age, being insulted is like a fate worse than death. And they would hurl these insults at me and make me feel really, really bad about myself. I say that to say that when I then better understood white privilege and how to be in conversation with people of color and other people who are marginalized, I always try to put myself in that place when I felt most vulnerable. And in my whole life, before since, that is the time that I felt most vulnerable. I was embarrassed. I was self-conscious. I felt, unable to fight against these forces that were arrayed against me, or so I perceived. And so as we have this conversation today, Jen, and what hopefully this can mean for someone else who is trying to engage in difficult conversations about race today, is I would encourage people from the dominant culture, white people, to think about and identify with those times when they were most vulnerable, and then have the conversation through that lens. That's kind of what I would counsel.
And then you grew up to become a person who clearly saw that white privilege. When when I've been in the room with you before, clearly it's interesting. It's clearly on display that people are looking to the tall white man for, okay, are you going to tell us what to do next? Are you going to tell us what we're doing here? Are you going to tell us, it's interesting because when you're aware of it, you can really witness this deep-seated subconscious way that people fall into line around these types of white privilege situations. And clearly you saw it, and it's very valuable for you to be somebody who says, I know, I've always watched how you've handled this. I know that I'm a privileged white male, and therefore I give my, I've watched you say, I'm not saying anything. I'm sitting back and I am giving this conversation over to others. you know, what do you think led to you being able to see your white male tall privilege, and develop, you know, most privileged people just focus on harnessing as much of that power and privilege as they possibly can, you know. How did you become aware of it, and how did you not do that as you got older?
Hmm. Um, so, well, that's a really good question.
Even know, maybe you
Right.
don't even know.
No, well, no, I don't fully know. I think empathy is so important.
Yeah.
And so I've always striven for empathy. I was in a, I was an interim pastor. This goes back maybe 20 years. And I'd formed a kind of a little group with a couple of other local pastors, and we would get together for lunch, and we were talking about what the next steps in my career would be. And they said to me, I never forget this. This is really strange. They said, the two guys, and they said to me, you know, the problem with you is you give away your power. And and
Mm.
I and I thought, well, maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that is what you kind of have to
They
do.
had actually noticed it and were
They
trying
and
to help.
they said it as a negative. They said it. They basically said, no, you wouldn't be good for that position because you give away your power too easy. And
Uh,
so it was said as a negative. But then, you know, I got, well, there's kind of a good precedent in that, in our faith, called Jesus, you know. And at first I was like, oh gee, do I do that? And then I
amazing
was
that
like,
Christians don't really care anything about how Jesus acted.
right. So
If you want to be a popular Reverend Bob,
that's right.
keep
That's right.
power
Don't give away your power.
and wield it over people.
Grab it. Yeah, that's right. So, but I think that, you know, it's always been important for me to 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 hear other voices. I mean, it's really whether that's people from different religions, whether it's people from different cultures, whether it's, you know, just people with different life experiences. That's always been important to me. I mean, you know, that the people that we were surrounded with at intersections, in terms of people on the staff or people that were partners and collaborators with us, there were all kinds of people. And I always felt that made the work we were doing richer, and me as an individual, you know, kind of more sensitive, more understanding, and respectful. And so I didn't see any reason why not to do that. And that's part of my pain for this country right now, is that, you know, we're so siloed in our different groups and belief systems and races and religions and what have you, you know. And if we just, you know, be a mosaic where we're all contributing to this, you know, multicolored rainbow that we have in this country, that we would be so much better off. And that is my hope for what's happening now with the Black Lives Matter support, that's transcending any particular racial group or any particular age or, you know, kind of cultural perspective. And so that's, you know, there's a lot not to be hopeful for right now, but that would be something I would be hopeful about.